Hi, I'm Bob Rosand, and I'd like to welcome you to my shop. What you see behind me are a number of pieces that I've done over the past few years, and they're basically all one-of-a-kind turnings. This particular one is a piece of broadleaf maple burl with inset of ebony, and that's been turned and carved. These two pieces here are pieces that I did in response to an exhibition that was called Forged in Fire. And in order to win any kind of a prize, you had to turn the piece, and it had to be burned or charred in some way. So this was the end result. This piece was turned, burned, turned again, and then carved. Whereas this particular piece over here was turned, and then I literally went to my junk drawer and pulled out a bunch of pieces, lag bolts, little bits of washer or whatever, and I burned them into the wood, and that was the result I got out of there. This piece came out of my backyard. We recently took an ash tree down, and I always kind of enjoyed turning natural edge pieces, and this was the piece that I got out of that tree. I have a few more waiting for me to turn, and like I said, I really enjoy them, so I look forward to doing some more of these. These two pieces, or these pieces here, are my experimentation in little footed bowls, and they're little pieces of broadleaf maple burl. Now this piece is a piece of broadleaf maple burl with a natural edge, and the entire piece has been bleached. And I started doing this after I saw Betty Scarpino's article on bleaching, and this is what I got. Now the piece tucked over in the corner behind my Christmas tree ornaments is a collaboration between myself and basket maker WGO. The wood is redwood burl, and the basketry is split oak. It's a decorative piece, but it can also serve as a functional piece. An elongated bowl like that could very well be a bread server. It's also a very nice way to present food to your guests. Up in the corner here are some of the raw materials that I use for some of my pieces, and they are mostly burls, mostly broadleaf maple burl. What I generally try to do is to turn the largest bowl that I can out of any burl that I have, and then save all the pieces and just recycle them down, right on down until there's very little left. Out of some of the pieces I'll get my Christmas tree ornaments, and they will be blocks like these. And I try and recycle the stuff right on down to pieces such as these, which in most cases will become pen blanks. They're a little bit larger. In some cases they'll become miniatures. Now most of these pieces back here are one of a kind, but what I found over the years is that if you're going to participate in local craft shows, you need a wide range of objects in order to sell, and my price range probably runs from about $10 to around $50, and that includes everything from weed pots up to Christmas tree ornaments. And that's what this tape is going to focus on, objects that you can make and sell at craft shows or that you can give away as gifts. Now the first group of objects we're going to look at are the weed pots. These are a variety of weed pots I've done over the years. Probably the earliest are the fence post weed pots, which is nothing more than a natural piece of wood. This is actually a piece of root that I turned. It's nothing more than a hole drilled into the top to put dried flowers, and in this case the bottom is just simply sanded flat. The appeal of it is really the natural edge, here, and the smooth surface. That contrast gives it a great deal of interest. The next variation is what I call, for want of a better word, disc weed pot. And this is really an attempt at not having to sand the thing at all. It's nothing more than a series of little coves turned into this piece, and the bottom has been flattened out in order to allow it to sit, and the hole's been drilled in order to take dried flowers. Another pretty popular weed pot, very inexpensive, is what I call an egg weed pot, and this is nothing more than basically an egg shape with a test tube inserted into it. This particular one wasn't intended to have a foot, but it has a foot because I drilled my way all the way through the bottom, and I wanted to save the little piece, and this is what I did. This is probably one of my oldest weed pots, and this is nothing more than a series of laminated pieces of oak that have been glued up. So they were short pieces, maybe 6 or 7 or 8 inches long. And that's the effect that I get out of that. What we're going to focus on for today are ring holders. And I found the idea in a magazine. And when I looked at it, what I realized was it was nothing more than a weed pot with this section of what I call flame added to it. And the only other stipulation is that you have to have this neck narrow enough in order to allow a ring to sit or to slide down over the top. And it keeps them organized on a dresser bureau. The raw materials for these are just odds and ends. This happens to be a piece of mountain laurel or rhododendron. I'm not positive which one. And the flame section will be made out of this contrasting piece of tulip wood. The next project would be the oil lamps, and we have a couple choices here. This is an oil lamp that I've done for a number of years. It's a Florentine oil lamp. It has a tenon on it, and I turn my bases and drill a hole for the tenon to fit. Probably the most important feature on this is that this needs to be a stable base. Obviously you're dealing with a lighted flame, and you certainly don't want it to spill over. This particular shape is just the shape that I've become comfortable with over the years, and there's no reason you couldn't vary the shape to suit your own needs. This other one here is just oak, just straight grained oak, and I've laminated it in order to get that visual effect, and it's just a way of using up odds and ends and scraps of wood that I have laying around. Now down here is an old candlestick that I did along the same lines, and you can see how it's changed over the years. It's not particularly something that I like or like to show, but it gives you an idea of how things have changed, how the lines and forms have changed for me over time. The other oil lamps I do are very simple oil lamps, and they're just basically bases. I put in these confetti oil lamp bases, and you can purchase these either wholesale or at some of the craft supply places. And it's nothing more than an inset in order to put the oil. This particular one is out of oak burl, and it has a concave bottom, so it sits properly. You can certainly vary it. This is broadleaf maple that's been bleached. And this one is buckeye burl, and it has not been bleached. That's the natural fungus growing through the wood. And then if you want to avoid sanding, you can attempt a variation along these lines, which is nothing more than using a 3/8 inch gouge to cut a series of coves in this piece. You cut it as clean as you can, and I just buff them up with the Kratex and finished it, and that's it. In terms of the raw material, for the Florentine oil lamps, I tend to glue up a lot of my stock. I had a good supply of zebra that was all warped, but I cut it into small pieces and glued it together, and that will become a Florentine oil lamp. For the confetti oil lamps, I generally use a piece of burl about 4 inches square and roughly 2 inches thick, and knock off the corners with a bandsaw. It just saves me a little bit of time when I'm turning, and this will become the confetti oil lamp. The third grouping are lidded boxes, and they're getting a little bit more sophisticated. In order to do these properly, you're going to need to use a bent angle tool, and it's another object that I've been doing for quite some time, and there's a lot of variety that you can get within lidded boxes. I've done some with feet on them, but these are just the standard ones that I do. This particular one is another bleached piece, and it's broadleaf maple burl, and it's been lined with a flocking material. Now, the flocking material is really just an adhesive that you paint on the inside, and it's kind of a suede that's been cut very, very fine. So what I do is put a coat of the adhesive material on the interior and let it dry overnight, and then I put another coat just to make sure I have a good deep color, and then put the flocking material on the inside and shake it up until it adheres to the surface. There are basically two reasons that I use the flocking material. One is that my customers, at least the customers that I have, seem to like the lined look on the interior. The other is that I don't particularly want to sand the interiors. So I cut them as clean as I can and then put the flocking material in. I might hit them with about 80 grit sandpaper, but that's about it. And then the box is finished. It saves me some time in finishing these because it is a production item. This is another lidded box, just a little bit taller. It hasn't been bleached or anything. Again, the bottom is concave and the lid comes off. These are all loose fitting lids also. At some of the local craft shows I had made lids that had a little bit of suction, but I tended to get those pieces broken when people lifted them up and held them over the ground. This particular piece is walnut burl, and I tend to use the natural flaws in the wood and allow them to be there. I like that. If you're getting tired of sanding, you might consider texturing the pieces. This piece is another small piece of broadleaf maple burl that's been lined again. And the lines have been put on with a spindle gouge that's been sharpened to a very sharp point. Probably the biggest thing you want to avoid is these lines overlapping, because if you do, they tend to tear up the wood and the surface becomes rough. This one I kind of call my beehive, and that's just a bunch of beads all the way around this particular piece. Probably the most important thing if you do miniatures is to keep proportion in mind. What I found is as you get smaller and smaller, you need to be aware that the base needs to be in proportion to the piece, as well as the opening of the vessel and the knob. And the bottoms are concave. One thing I do not do with the interiors of the miniatures is to line them. What I do is cut them as clean as I can, and then I put a sanding sealer on the interior, and then they are finished. This is a shape that I like. To me, it's relatively pleasing. I like the proportions. Again, keep in mind the base in proportion to the width as well as the lid. This one I find very unsuccessful. I don't like the shape of it. It strikes me as just kind of a lump sitting there. The next project are birdhouse ornaments. I started turning birdhouse ornaments a number of years ago when I really wasn't able to sell my full-size birdhouse ornaments. They were obviously a lot more expensive. And these run in about a $35 range, and they are very successful as Christmas tree ornaments. Actually, I do two kinds. One is intended to just strictly hang from a tree, and that has a screw eye in the top of it. And the other kind is one for people who collect these things, and that's an ornament that can hang on the wall of the house. And I do have a certain number of people that collect the various sizes that I do, and they grace their walls. Now, the final project that we're going to cover in this videotape are Christmas tree ornaments, and this is probably what I'm most well known for. The ornaments basically consist of three pieces, and the first thing I turn is the globe, which is hollowed out, and then the next section to turn is the what I call the icicle, which is glued into place, and then to finish it up it needs a finial, which is turned out of the remainder of the wood. You can get a great deal of variety out of these ornaments. These are all turned basically the same with 4 segments in each one, but depending on what you do with the globe or whether you dye them or whatever, you can get a very different looking ornament. This particular one is one that was turned with a series of coves on the globe. This one is done with a Banksia seed pod. This particular one has been dyed with an aniline dye, and it's been sprayed with a gloss lacquer. This ornament has been bleached, and then I took the icicle and the finial and used leather dye to get the black. One of the more popular ones are the ornaments that my wife paints for me, and she uses oil-based paints and spends a lot more time painting them than I do turning them. Now, if you're first starting out turning these, I don't expect to get the icicle extremely long. This is one that we found at my mother-in-law's that I had turned a number of years ago. And obviously you can see that the icicle is much, much shorter and less defined or refined. And also in my mind that the globe is out of proportion to the length of the ornament. A variation on the Christmas tree ornament are tree toppers. Susan, my wife, pestered me for a number of years to come up with a tree topper, and this was the variation I came up with, which is nothing more than a Christmas tree ornament turned upside down, a little bit bigger in diameter, a little bit longer and heavier, and then I turn what I call a funnel on the top so it'll sit on the tree. And this has been relatively popular. These ornaments range in roughly from anywhere from $27 to about $45 or $50. Some people just don't want to spend that kind of money. So you might want to consider ornaments along these lines, which are just basically spindle ornaments. And I turn them, and then Susan paints them, and we put a little bit of holly. And they run in, I believe, about the $8 to $10 range. And those are something that I consider a bread and butter item that pays your gas money to and from craft shows. The only thing I haven't talked about so far are these two ornaments here. This is an earlier one that I did, and it has a short icicle and a little bit larger finial, and the globe is a little bit heavy. This one is hanging here because it was an ornament sent to me by a fellow in Georgia, and I thought it was interesting, the concept of using two globes, and I think it's got some possibilities. So at this point, let's go to the lathe and get to work. Okay, the lathe that I turn on is an old Myford ML8. This one is about 20 years old, and I bought it, well, about 20 years ago. One thing I like about this lathe is the ease with which you can move the tool rest. And with just a twist of a finger, you can change the tool rest around and slide it very rapidly around the lathe. So this to me is a very user-friendly, small, light-duty lathe, and it's my production lathe. I turn a lot of my work, my small work, on a 3-jaw chuck. I find it indispensable, and I don't have to switch back and forth. I don't feel the need to go to other chucks. Now this lathe initially came with a metal bench. I happen to be an advocate of wooden benches, so this particular one is built out of fir, and the legs are about 2 feet wide. And what I've done is build in a compartment in between my legs, and I've filled that with sand, so that gives me about 300 pounds of sand, but it also provides me with a place to throw all my extra tools. The other modification that I've made is actually based on an article by Dale Stubbs. It was called Mass and Rigidity, Tuning Up Your Lathe, and it's a clutch system. What this allows me to do is to raise and lower the motor, and it causes the belt to slip, slowing down the lathe. And I'll turn it on for you, and you can see that the work slows down. This is easier, probably a little bit easier on the motor, and it also allows me to look at the work that I'm turning without turning the lathe on and off all the time, and it's just a quicker method of work. The other thing I've done is I have put a pulley system on the outboard side of the lathe. I'm left-handed, and when I do some outboard turning, I go to the outboard side of the lathe and turn, so that's occasionally very helpful to me. First thing we need to do is to glue the waste block onto the turning blank. I've already sanded this flat, and this is also sanded flat, so they'll have a good joint. And we'll do that in this case with super glue. And I just center that as best I can. Give it a second or two to dry. And then a little spritz of the accelerator, and we're ready to turn. And then I bring up the tail center whenever possible, and we're about ready. Adjust the tool rest. One thing you don't want is to have that happen when you turn on the lathe. But get the tool rest as close as you can to the work without hitting it, like so. Now the first thing you want to do is rough this down to a cylinder. Now in this particular case I'm using a small bowl gouge, and I only use that because I'm very comfortable with it. There's no reason in the world that you can't use a spindle gouge, a 1/2 inch or a 3/8 to do this. Now one little thing I do is to wax my tool rest. I keep the tool rest as close as I can to the work, and I do that because I don't want the tool hanging, extending over. It's always a good idea to stop the lathe, stop the rotation of the lathe before you move your tool rest. You could end up with the tool rest into the jaws or into the work itself, damaging yourself or the work. There's a couple ways you can find out if the cylinder is round without shutting off the lathe, and one is just to simply lay your tool on top of the piece. If it bounces, it's not round. The other thing is to simply touch the piece with your thumb in that manner, making sure that you don't get your finger down where it doesn't belong. Now I'm left-handed, so my position at the lathe may seem a little odd to you. If you're right-handed or left-handed, you're just going to have to adjust your position at the lathe. Okay, that's about 2 3/4 inches. Now I'm going to switch over to a spindle gouge and just very roughly approximate the finished shape. Now I want to leave this neck relatively thick, but I want to get just a rough idea what this is going to look like. I'll take a little bit out of the bottom. Now keep in mind, make sure that the bevel is rubbing with the tool. And again, this is just a very, very rough shape. And I'll switch back here. A lot of the tool control comes out of my hands, and the flexing and grasping. Okay, at this point I'm going to stop the lathe and make a couple of cuts that I need to be done before I can go any further. I need to make this cut in here, and I need to drill this hole. Make sure the bevel's rubbing again. Take a light cut. Light cut. Okay, now let's see what we have. All right. Always make sure you hang on to the drill chuck. One thing you don't want is for that chuck to come out of the Morse taper while this lathe is spinning. It's always a good idea to make sure that you free the chips fairly often. Okay, so that is done. Now that hole was drilled about 2 inches deep. Now at this point we can start to refine the shape a little bit more. Keep in mind that this is the widest diameter here is going to end up to be no more than a ½ an inch, and that's going to be blended in with the rest of this piece. Take gentle cuts. And we'll change around. Shut off the lathe for a second, see what we got, and adjust the tool rest. I'm going to cut a little bit more out of the base here. Now we're cutting in the waste block. Okay. And just little fine cuts to refine the shape. Now we still have to take a fair amount of material off to the top of this ring holder. And we'll stop the rotation of the lathe. Get the tool rest as close as you can. And you can start cutting again. The only danger point right here is where the tip of the gouge is, and that's just kind of a point of entry problem. You can see the finished shape start to emerge from the piece. Okay, we can look at that again. It's starting to get there. Now what I don't want to do is take too much material off of the base here, just it would get a little bit flimsy. And again, this is thin enough where you don't want to take put too much pressure, you just want to support it. At this point what I do in most of my turnings is to take a mixture of sanding sealer and turpentine, which is roughly 50-50. It's in a coffee can, and I saturate the turning with it. There's nothing magical about it, it's just it wets the fibers of the wood, and I think it gives me a cleaner cut on my final cut. Okay. Paper towel helps keep the stuff from flying around too much. Okay, now we can take a few final cuts. Just nice gentle cuts. If you cut too deep, you're going to go below the layer, you're going to go below where the oil saturated, and it won't do its job. Okay, I'm going to stop the rotation of the lathe for a second and adjust my tool rest. And just blend this together very lightly. Adjust the tool rest, and then I've switched to a little bit smaller gouge. You don't want to shove the gouge in too far, otherwise it's going to catch. Okay. And that's pretty much going to be the shape of this ring holder. Okay, at this point, what I normally do is sand the piece, and it's something like this. I'd start with about 180 grit and work my way up to at least 400 or maybe 600 grit. I'll also slow the lathe down, the rotation of the lathe, and I will adjust the belts for that. Close up my cover again, and start sanding. Now, there's nothing magical about how I sand, but I will use my little foot pedal to slow things down a little bit. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we're only going to sand with 180 grit, and then we're going to stop that and go on with the rest of the project. I can actually remove the tail center. Do a little light sanding in here. You don't want to put too much pressure on the neck of this. Okay, and then we'll start the lathe again. Now, my method of making this this bottom concave is a little unorthodox. And I hold that in, put that in the 3-jaw, and put the piece in there. Now, that's as deep as the hole went, and I'll run that up tight. And then I bring my tail center up, and I'm going to keep the lathe running a little slow. Very gentle cuts. You don't want to remove that tenon down there totally. Stop the lathe again. What I do at this point is put some more of my sanding sealer on to make that final cut. Try not to remove too much of that tenon. Now I change over to my little round 1/4-inch skew. You don't get in a lot of trouble as long as that trailing edge does not get into the workpiece. Now here I'm going to make a little peeling cut. And you can't bull this, you just have to do it nice and gentle. We're just about through. And I'm going to stop at that point. I'm going to remove the tail center, and that little nubbin comes off. We'll shut off the lathe, gently remove the piece, and then you can use your skew just to clean up the very little bottom, like so. And then you can put it back on the lathe again and very gently sand it. One of the reasons you can use this is because it is a very light piece and there's very little mass to it. So we have that, good off, and that's the base, and what we need to do at this point is to make the flame. Start to lessen the diameter. I'm waiting to get to about 1/2 inch. So we're very close. That's about 1/2 inch in diameter. I'm going to switch to a little bit smaller roughing out gouge. And then I'll start to refine the shape a little bit. There again, you don't want to extend this piece too far out from the 3-jaw chuck. Okay. I'm going to switch over to my skew. Nice and sharp. And I'll slow it down, check, make sure the diameter is okay. That's a tad over 1/2 inch, but that's pretty close. We'll leave it at that. And now I need to use my dial calipers to get the inside diameter, and I just open it up like so. Okay, and that's the diameter. I just lock these in. And slow the lathe down again, so I have a little bit more to go. Okay, that's just about it. Just going to give it a little shave here. And it doesn't hurt to touch it up with a little bit of sandpaper. And that's ready to part off. That fits good, nice and snug. A little bit of glue will hold it right in, and there you have a ring holder once it's finished. And here you can see how the tool bounces because it's not down to a cylinder yet. Now I'm going to move the tool rest a little bit closer to the workpiece. Get the final cut now. That feels true. Just check it with my thumb, and it is running true. And we adjust our tool rest. Bring up the drill bit. Now I've already marked this to the approximate depth that I want, which is the height of the oil lamp. Hang on to the drill chuck. Okay, now that's not pretty, but it makes an effective hole. Okay. Now that's not quite as deep as I want to go, but what I'll do is clean up the bottom with the square nose scraper, and that'll give me a little bit more depth, and that'll be at the correct depth. And the little dimple is gone. And this is a spindle gouge. We'll just remove enough to get an idea what the piece is going to look like. Now, starting to get an idea what the final shape is going to be. Okay, now I'm going to remove the tail center, and I need to refine the lip of this piece. Like so. So we have that edge squared up. Now I want to round over this lip, and I'm just going to use my scraper very gently to do that. I find this to be the easiest tool just to make these kind of gentle curves. Could be done with a small gouge if you wanted. Now we'll see what it looks like. Okay, that's relatively clean, but I'm going to put my oil on it and make a final cut. Very gentle. Okay, and that should do the lip. And I'm going to switch over to a little bit smaller tool. Make that cut. Okay, and that's about as far as I want to go right now. Now what I'll do is wet the entire piece, take a final cut, and cut that as clean as I can. Then I'm going to cut a bunch of coves on it. And I set my compass to almost any width you want. This is about 3/8 of an inch. And with the lathe running slowly, simply mark it. This is a piece we're going to do without touching it with a piece of sandpaper. Go down as far as you can. Keep your fingers away from the jaws. We'll do one more. Okay, now we're going to cut the coves. Just a light cut. You don't go all the way to the lines. Just a very light cut. Okay, now we stop and inspect the piece. It's cut fairly clean, but what I want to do is wet the piece and recut, do the entire thing again. Okay, now we'll stop the lathe or slow it down and take a look. And those cuts are a lot cleaner than what I had before. Now, at this point, I'm going to remove the tail center, and I'm going to do some little decorative cutting on the lip of this piece. The tool I'm going to use is essentially a worn-out spindle gouge that's been sharpened to a very sharp point, and that'll just make a very, very fine cut. So we'll let the lathe come up to speed. Just use your fingers just to make that first cut. Okay, then we make the second. And make one more cut. Now all that remains is to stop the lathe, take a look at the work, and buff it with the abrasive pads. And I'm just going to get any little rough edges off. And if you've done this and cut this properly, there should be really no need to sand. And as soon as I get the excess off of here, we'll just part it off, friction fit it, and we'll finish the bottom, and that'll be the end of the piece. We'll slow it down just a little bit. And there you have that. Okay, now we take out the glue block and put in a friction fit block, and this is a block of white pine. I use the white pine because it doesn't damage the lip of the turning. True it up. Okay, now I use the calipers to get the inside diameter of my lip. Just kind of wiggle it till it's in place. Now just gently touch the sharp point of the calipers, and that gives me a rough mark of the tenon that I want to make in order to hold this piece in place. And we'll see how that fits. All right. Slow the lathe down. And make my marks again. I'm almost at the point where I'm going to have to remove the center. Now what I'll do is use my sanding sealer again before I make my final cuts. Then we go to our finer pad. And back to our sanding sealer. Shut off the lathe. Pop it off. And you have a confetti oil lamp. I generally make my boxes out of maple burl, and the first thing I need to do is to turn the whole thing down to a cylinder, and we're doing that now. After I do that, I'll true up the top, and then I'll part off what's going to be the lid. The pencil lines just allow me to recenter the lid after I've parted it off from the main body of the box. And I'll remove the tail center. And this will be the inside of the box, this will be the inside of the lid. Now what you don't want to do is remove too much material from the top, because you want the top to match up as well as you can with the lid. So I'm just going to get a rough shape of this. And I want to leave as much mass as I can at the bottom of this, but still get an idea of the finished shape. I should probably mention again, this is I'm using a small bowl gouge on this, but there's absolutely no reason why a spindle gouge wouldn't work. So just keep on refining this shape. Okay, now just kind of look at your shape. Now I'm going to go back to the base of it a little bit. Mostly what I want to do here is leave enough mass at the bottom of this thing so when I hollow it, it doesn't shatter. But I also want to know what the shape of this thing is going to look like. And again, this is just a very fine cut. You may have to do it a couple times until you get down to where you've got very smooth wood. Now if you look close at the surface, what you'll see is a very clean surface here and some little tear outs here. And using the sanding sealer, you can eliminate a great deal of your sanding and those tear outs. This is an idea I found in a book by Ray Key. Check it with a pencil, and I'm going to stop there. I have a little bit of room to play with. To hollow this lidded box, I'll be using a round nose scraper and a bend angle tool, and I'll be telling you more about that later. Generally just work close to the line here, and what I'm trying to do with the round nose scraper is to just clear out the interior so I can get in and go to work with the bend angle tool. I don't want to make the sidewalls too thin before I start removing material from the neck here. At this point, I'm going to clean out the interior and switch to my bent angle tool and do some more hollowing. Now the bend angle tool is simply made out of a piece of square mild steel with a piece of high-speed steel silver soldered at about a 40-degree angle. It varies a little bit from bit to bit. And the cutting edge it's nothing more than a round nose scraper, and as I make my initial cut, I cut on the side, and as I move the tool in, I start cutting on the front, and then I'll finish up a cut by cutting on the side. So it's a rotation, a motion of going like that on the interior of the bowl. Remember, as I'm cutting on the left-hand side of that tool, just gentle cuts. Just kind of a rounded motion. Okay, take the tool out, and then we'll check the interior and see what kind of damage I did. And you can see I've got a good ½ an inch to go there. So we'll keep on cutting. And I'm going to slow down the lathe. Okay, and we'll check the wall thickness. And I can go a little bit thinner with that, a little bit more at the bottom. But I also want to check and see how thick the pieces at the bottom. Now these are nothing more than a couple pieces of bent coat hanger, bent at 90-degree angles. I got the idea from David Ellsworth, and the points just have to touch. When you put them in the piece, it gives you an idea of, so we got about a ½ inch there, so we've got a ways to go. Okay, now I'll go back to the scraper. Let's take a bit more out. Then I'm going to switch over to my round nose scraper, clean up the bottom a little bit. Okay, we'll check our thickness again after I blow it out. Okay, sidewall's almost as thin as we need to go. Now what I don't mind is for the sidewalls to be consistent and then thicken out just a little bit as we get to the bottom, so that we have an area to make this, the bottom of this box, concave. I'm using a round nose now. And that's adequate for this one. We'll check the depth of the box, or the bottom of the box, and that'll be good. Now what I'll do is wet the interior, take a final cut, and then we'll be done with the interior. Okay, the round nose scraper. Slow it down. Feels pretty clean. The final thing I'll do is use a spindle gouge just to clean up this edge right here and get rid of those pencil lines. Now I'll take a look and see how clean it cut. And that was clean, and that finishes the interior of the box. Now the piece is unsupported, but it's very light at this point, and I need to refine the bottom. And then I'm going to stop and check the depth one more time. Just use a pencil for that. I eyeball a line, bring that back. It should be okay. Now at this point what I'll do is slow the lathe down, sand it, and then part it off the lathe and friction fit it. Clean that up at the skew and then put it back on and finish sanding the bottom. A little more sanding sealer on the neck here. Okay, we're at that point. Now we need to make the lid. I've already glued my lid stock to the waste block, and now I'm ready to turn it. First thing I want to do is true up the cylinder. What I don't want to do is I don't want to remove too much material, otherwise the lid won't match up too closely to the body of the box. So you just take one pass, and now I'm going to get my inside diameter. Okay, that's just an approximation right there. That's about the inside of the lip. So now what I'll go do is go back and remove more of this material. And I'll stop about there. Readjust the tool rest. I've switched over to my smaller gouge. Come right up to the line. Make another cut. And at that point I switch over to my skew. I'll just make a little cut. And I switch over again. There we go. Remove that. Okay, now try the fit. Now that's the fit I want. It's a little bit loose, but I want the shoulder to be nice and tight right in here. So that's going to work real good for me. And just clean up the inside of the lid with the skew. Just keep the trailing edge out of your way and you should be fine. You feel? And the inside of the lid is done except for a little touch-up sanding. Just start to refine the outside of the lid. I'm going to switch over to my skew in a second. And we'll just make a very light cut. And I'm just going to touch this with a bit of sandpaper. And friction fit the lid and finish it up. Okay, now that is a little bit loose. I think we can fix it with a piece of paper towel. I taught Richard Raffin how to do this. Now the big thing is you want to make sure it doesn't go too deep, otherwise it comes through the bottom of the lid. I'll take a small scrap of ebony, make the knob, glue it in, and that'll be the finished box. I use my skew. Get a good clean cut. And I switch over to a small spindle gouge. Again, I normally sand this to about 400-600 grit. Very gently. Just a tad bit more. Okay, we'll part that off. And fit the knob in here. A little bit of glue. And that's the completed box. My birdhouse ornaments are my most complex project, at least in terms of the number of parts. There's the body, the finial, the pendant acorn, and the perch, as well as the roof and the base of the birdhouse. I prepare the body of the birdhouse by cutting 1.5 inch square of walnut, in this case, by about 3.5 inches long. Then I put a center line down the piece of wood and I drill out the opening for the birdhouse, and as well as the opening for the perch. And then I turn this between centers. The finished body is about 1.25 inches in diameter, give or take a little. It's close. And then I true up the bottom of it so they can hold it in a 3-jaw chuck. And then we shut off the lathe and take it out and put the 3-jaw chuck in. And then see how true it runs. That's pretty good. And I'll make a mark where I want to cut off the top of the birdhouse. That's just an approximation. And then I'm going to part that piece right off. Okay. And we'll bring this down to its final dimension. Okay, now I'm going to work with the skew a little bit. Okay. Now I drilled out about 1.5 inches deep. I suppose I could drill this out to its final dimension, but I find that this lessens the chances of cracking it when I scrape it out. I use my calipers to make sure that the wall thicknesses, or the walls, are parallel inside. And get ready to part it off. Use my calipers to get the diameter, but then I just extend it just a little bit, and that becomes the length of the body. Like so, and we'll part it off. And I just sand out this little fuzzy stuff here, and you have your birdhouse body complete. Now what we need to do is to turn the roof of the ornament, and the orientation of it is like this. And what I do is I cut a recess in here just to lighten the weight a little bit, and I also cut a rabbet to fit the body of the ornament too. Okay, now I've cut a little bit of a recess. I'm going to slow the lathe down. Use my calipers to get the greater diameter of the body, and I'll transfer that to the body, or to the roof, like so. And there I know about how wide that is. Then I go back to my spindle gouge and just take a little bit more weight out of the interior of the roof. That's the only purpose for doing this, is just to lighten it up a little bit. Okay, now I use my little square nose scraper and just cut that little bit of a rabbet. Just a little shoulder is all you need. Like so. Okay, shut the lathe, or stop the lathe, and fit. Now that's a little bit loose, but that's okay. That'll work just fine. I'm using my larger spindle gouge. Sometimes the piece starts warping in here, but generally not a big problem. Gentle cut. Just a nice smooth transition is what you're looking for. One little high spot. There we go. And we pray. Sometimes it helps to just hold it a little bit, especially when you're bringing the drill bit out. Sometimes it'll pull itself out. That worked out great. You take it out, and if you did it right, there'll be no jaw marks on the piece at all, and your hole is pretty well centered. Now we need to make the bottom of the birdhouse. This is the face you'll see, and this is the bottom. It's got a tenon on it, and the orientation is this way. And we set the calipers. It's just an approximation. And I'll take a little cut here. Not too deep. Okay, another cut. This is just a pivoting motion with your skew, and readjusting again. What I'm going to do is come straight in with the point of the skew, clean this up. Come out here. With that cut, then long point of the skew for where the hole's going to go. And pull it out. Now I need to cut my tenon. I'll come in with my parting tool. Don't cut too much. Check the fit. It's a little bit tight. Okay, and that should be pretty good. Now I'll use my parting tool, my skew parting tool, and I'll just undercut a little bit. And that fits in there, and the roof fits on like so, and that's it. I bring these down to about a 3/8 of an inch diameter. I use the roughing gouge for that. Okay, that's good. Now, I use the long point of the skew just to square up that end. What I need to do is square it up so I can drill a little hole to accept the screw eye to hang the ornament, and we'll center that hole. Hopefully it runs pretty true. There we go. The reason I do this now is because if I turn this down to a small diameter and try and drill a hole, it'll probably crack. Now I'll switch over to my 3/8 inch spindle gouge and just start to shape the finial. And then I'll switch back to my smaller gouge. If I go too thin, this is going to crack, so I'll leave it a little heavier than I'd like. And then we just start to shape the finial. A little bit more out of there. Okay, that's pretty good. Now what I can do is slow the lathe down here, and I need to get the diameter right here. Okay, I have to transfer that to the bottom of this finial until I get a little bit of a mark, and that just makes sure that that bottom of the finial matches up with the top of the birdhouse. And I'll use my standard parting tool to come in. Not so much that it gets flimsy, Now, I've done that a little bit. Now I want to come in and undercut just a tad, so I'm using my other skew. Let's just make sure that the thing fits nice and tight. Now I'm going to get my calipers. And I'm just running the parting tool a little bit back and forth as I scrape. Okay, that should be a good fit. So I'll take my little parting tool, slice that off, like so, and see how it fits. And that's perfect. Now I will switch to my little skew. This part is going to be the acorn. Just a little scraping motion there. I don't know that you have to be real fussy about these. Pretty much, if you look at acorns, they're all different shapes. It's very much like looking at eggs. Just clean that up, make it sharp. And this is the crown or the cap to the acorn. I've tried making these pendants in lots of different shapes, but I keep on coming back to the acorn. I just really think it looks nice, dresses it up. Our skew, just peel a little bit, not much. Just gives us an opening to work. It's the same principle or technique that you use for the finial. Just part it off. So, shut off the lathe. And check our fit. Okay, that is loose, but a little 5-minute epoxy will take care of that. I'll just use the skew in a scraping mode. True up this end. This is going to be the outer end of the perch. And here I'm just doing a light scrape. Now we'll switch over to the small spindle gouge. Just round it over a little bit. As soon as I do that, I'm going to sand this just a little bit. And I check out the dimension of the tenon. You can always use the drill bit that you drill these holes with too, but I generally forget which drill bit I used. Good. And that is your perch. When I put the parts on, it just kind of lengthens it out and just makes it look a little bit more elegant. So we'll use a little super glue here. It's just on the cardboard. We'll put that piece in. And the next piece we'll put in is the perch. Just takes a little bit of the glue. Too much and it squirts out. And it starts to look a little more interesting. And this is one that's a little loose fitting, so I'm going to get a little extra glue in there. And I'll also hold it in place so you can see it. And the final thing is the little brass eye pin. And I just get a little extra glue on there. And once that dries, it's your completed ornament. Now my Christmas tree ornaments I turn to a finished diameter of about 2 1/4. We'll take a little bit more out of that. As long as you're close, it's fine. And I'll check that again. Okay, we're real close now. I can start refining the shape a little. And again, this is a bowl gouge. No reason you can't use a spindle gouge. You just get a rough approximation. Again, what you want to make sure is that you leave enough mass at the base of this thing so that you can hollow it out. And that's about as far as I'd want to go. And at this point, I'll wet it and cut it with sanding sealer and try and do a final cut. And I'm going to drill a 3/8 inch hole through here and through the entire ornament. The first tool I use is a square nose scraper, and I just run it straight in. You feel it start to chatter a little bit, that's about as deep as you want to go. And use my round nose scraper just to go in and open up the interior. This time at a little bit of an angle. And then I use my small bent angle tool to just start to make the first cut around the corner. Okay, so I'm just going around a corner here. And I'm going to switch tools to one with a little bit longer shaft. We can go about half that. I'll go to a little bit longer shafted tool. Now when I do these, I'm not real concerned about the interiors unless you can see in them with an area of bark inclusion or something. Mostly what I'm concerned about is lessening the weight of the ornament so it can hang from a Christmas tree. And it's still a little thick on the side wall. And the top is just about done, so I'll take one more cut. You want to make sure you don't make this tenon too small, otherwise you go into the hole that you drill through the entire ornament. So, and we'll sand that and then we'll part it off the lathe. And there you have your globe. Now I'm going to remove a little extra material from the end here. This is going to be the bottom of the icicle. But when I'm holding it in a 3-jaw chuck, I don't want too much material out there. Now the orientation for this icicle is this way. I will be doing this little segment first, work my way back, do the second, third, fourth, then finish it off, cut the tenon, and then part the entire ornament off, and hopefully it'll fit. Now I use my small roughing out gouge just very gently. If you catch here, it's going to throw the entire thing out. If you start to hear chatter, back up on the cut. Now what I need to do is use my small skewer to remove that little section that was held in by the tail center. So I'm just cleaning that up. I'm supporting the piece a little bit with my fingers to eliminate chatter. And all the tool control is coming from my thumb. The fine motions are in the thumb. The coarse motions are in my left hand. And then I use the long point down and just sharpen that little tip. Then use the skew with a peeling action, just very gently, otherwise it's going to knock the whole thing loose. Now the reason I don't support this thing with a tailstock is because I don't know how I would make the ornaments as delicate as they are running the tail center up there. The closer you get to the 3-jaw chuck, the faster you can work, but you need to take your good old time while you're down here. This ash that I'm using is green. I found that even as it dries, it doesn't warp very much. and I can cut it a little bit faster. I just come in with the heel. Okay, another peeling cut. It's also a little dangerous time. You want to take your time with that. Okay, we're going to go back to the roughing out gouge. And before I go too far, I'm going to have to sand a little bit. You don't want to take too much material away from the widest diameter of this tenon. If you do, the whole thing is going to be flimsy. So you just work your way back a segment at a time. Okay, back to the skew. Now I'm cutting up in the long point there, and then I switch down to cutting on the heel of the tool. Long point. Switch back again. And another cut or two and we'll be okay with this one. So now I'm going to peel. As soon as that started chattering, I stopped. Okay. I'm going to move the tool rest and we'll go to the fourth segment. Long point of the skew. Again, keep the trailing edge of that tool out of the work and you'll be fine. Okay, at that point I ought to touch this up with a little bit of sandpaper and then we'll finish the rest of the icicle. And cut a cove. You just want the cove to be nice and smooth. A little decorative section here. Switch over to the skew again. Get that cut. Start that. Come in with the skew. A little slight peeling cut, not very much. Yeah, that feels fairly clean. Now I'm going to clean up this edge here. The other piece. Okay, now we'll clean up the interior of that cove. Just do a little more refining here. Now what we have to do is get the dimension of the tenon. So I use my globe and my calipers and again get that diameter. Okay, that's just about there. Then I'll switch tools. Very gentle cut. And see how it fits. That's a perfect fit. Okay, now what I need to do is to make a finial for the top of the ornament. And the first thing I have to do is cut a tenon, and that'll be this piece here. I'm going to go down to about 3/8 of an inch in diameter. And now we'll work on the rest of it. And switch over to the skew. And cut the shoulder. Back to the gouge. Sometimes I get pulled off by the grain pattern. Assemble the parts. And you have an ornament. Sometimes when I set up my booth at a craft show, I'll look at my display and I'll wonder, do I have too much of a variety, too much of a range of work, from very inexpensive things like bottle stoppers up to more expensive platters and that kind of thing. And I look at other craftspeople and I see some of them are very, very focused on what they do. They do specifically little hollow forms or large hollow forms or bowls or whatever. And here I am with keychains and ring holders, weed pots, lidded boxes. Sometimes I wonder if people look at me and say, does this guy know what he's doing? But on the other hand, I've had people come in and look at the booth and just say, oh, this is wonderful, particularly the idea that they can just spend $10 and go home with a little piece of something that you made and did as good a job as you can on. I always tell people when we're working to enjoy the cut. I see a lot of people trying to hog out a lot of material fast, but I always try and push the idea of making a clean cut that has nice shavings and that kind of thing. Getting the best cut you can from the tool, and enjoy the process of what you're doing. I'm just not sure I consider myself an artist. I guess I'm probably more of a craftsman or a technician. And I think probably all of us that come into this area would probably like to consider themselves an artist or to become an artist. But there's also nothing wrong with being a good technician or a good craftsman. And part of that to me comes in teaching my skills to others, and just doing I guess just the best possible job I can do. Even with a $10 keychain, I will finish that as well as I finish a lidded box or a bowl. At any given time, you just do the best possible job that you can. And I guess there's a lot of satisfaction to be derived from that.